It was the kind of Tacoma rain that makes the whole block feel like it's breathing slow and damp, as if the houses were drawing a long sigh together. June was already in my spare room, small under the quilt with her socks still on, the pink ones with the little fox faces. I tucked the blanket around her and was halfway to the door when she tugged my sleeve and whispered like she was borrowing a voice that wasn't hers. "Grandma." Mom said, "I can't tell you what's behind the blue door." I felt it before I understood it, the way a room changes right before a storm hits. I smoothed the hair from her forehead and kept my voice soft. "Okay," I said. "You don't have to say anything tonight." She watched me for a beat, like she was measuring the safety in my face. Then she tucked her chin into the quilt and went still. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while, listening to her breathing settle. The wind chimes out on my porch, thin to a distant clink, like coins in a pocket. In the hallway, I found her backpack slumped against the wall, damp at the bottom from the walk-in. I opened it to pull out a clean set of pajamas, and that's when I saw the key, brassy and old, tied to a frayed ribbon the exact blue of a summer sky. It wasn't any key I recognized from my house or Noah's toolbox. I held it in my hand and it warmed fast, like it had been waiting in someone else's pocket for hours. I should tell you something about me. I used to believe peace meant silence. Losing my son taught me how to pick up 1,000 pieces. It didn't teach me how to speak when my voice could shake the walls. With Kendra, I learned to hold my tongue until it grew heavy. Single mom. Odd shifts. Bills that don't blink. Who was I to add one more weight? That's how it always starts. You keep giving the benefit of the doubt until you realize you've handed over the whole benefit. I laid the key on the kitchen counter and made tea I didn't really want. The rain tapped at the window in a steady, patient rhythm. I told myself not to call anyone tonight. Let the child sleep. Let the fear cool. I wiped a circle of fog off the glass and looked across the street at Mr. Leary's porch light. "He leaves it on for his old dog," he says, "so she can find her way back in." My own porch light flickered once and steadied, like it had chosen a side. When June woke a little after midnight, she padded into the kitchen and climbed into my lap without a word. She smelled like rain and crayons. I held her, and we didn't talk. Sometimes love is just refusing to move. After a while, she pointed at the key with her chin, then pulled the quilt up to her mouth like a curtain. I nodded, because nodding was all the honesty I had. "Do you want a story?" I asked. She shook her head. "Will you be here if I fall asleep again?" "I'll be right here," I said. I meant it more than I've meant anything in a long time. When she drifted off, I eased her back into bed and sat at the kitchen table with a pen and one of those spiral notebooks the grocery store sells for 99 cents. "Harbor log," I wrote at the top. Not because I had a plan, plans come later, but because I needed a place to put the weight I'd been carrying. I wrote down the time, the whisper, the phrase, "blue door," the key with the ribbon. My hand shook a little, then steadied as the words landed. I thought about Kendra, about the way she watches the world through a crack in the door, like everything is either about to leave or ask for something. I've been that woman. I know how a person can get small on purpose. I also know how often "don't tell grandma" is not a favor but a muzzle. Out on the porch, the chimes stirred again, brighter this time, and the rain eased to a velvet hiss. I wrapped the ribbon around the key and set it on top of the notebook, like I was pinning a map with a thumbtack. I told myself I'd sleep, figure it out in the morning, let my better angels hold a meeting, but the house felt like it was leaning in, listening for what I'd do next. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the doorway of June's room until my eyes adjusted to the dark. She had one hand over her cheek, the other stretched toward the nightstand, palm open, as if she were waiting to be handed something she couldn't name. I went back to the table and wrote one more line, just to keep myself honest. If this is nothing, the truth can stand the light. Then I tucked the key into my pocket. What door needs a ribbon to keep it sweet? Morning in Tacoma always smells a little like wet cedar and diner coffee, especially after a long night at the hospice. I came off shift with that soft hum inside my bones, the sound your body makes when it's been keeping other people's endings company. When I unlocked my front door, the house felt smaller than usual, like it had curled itself around what June said last night and decided to keep it warm. Kendra had texted while I was on break. "Keeping her again tonight? Double at the store." "No, hello." "No, thank you. Just the kind of message that slides under a door and expects you to pick it up without bending. I wrote back, "Yes, because I always do, even when yes feels like a splinter." That's my bad habit, confusing kindness with permission. June was at the kitchen table with a coloring book. She had that quiet that looks like calm from far away, but close up you can hear the gears working. The pink fox socks again, ankles crossed. I set toast in front of her and she nodded, deliberate, like she was agreeing to the idea of toast rather than the toast itself. She colored in a little girl holding a kite, but the kite's string ran down instead of up, and at the bottom of the page she drew a rectangle with a circle off to the side. Not a doorknob, exactly, more like a dial. She shaded 2 tiny ticks next to it. "What's that part?" I asked. "Easy, not hunting." She shrugged, the small kind, like a feather falling off her shoulder. "Just a door." I wanted to say blue door, but I let the words pass me by. Last night's key was on the counter wrapped in its ribbon, looking like a promise I hadn't agreed to. I slipped it into the drawer with the napkins and the rubber bands. Hiding is not denying. It just buys you a minute. We stopped by the school because Miss Patel wanted to see June about the reading group. She's the kind of counselor who remembers the names of stuffed animals. Her office smells like dry erase markers and tangerines. June curled into the big chair and drew while we talked. I kept it simple. Long shifts, extra nights with me, trying to give Kendra a little grace. Miss Patel listened the way people do when they aren't waiting to talk. Then she tapped the notebook in my hand. "Do you keep any kind of log?" she asked. "For what?" "For what you notice. Not conclusions, details. Dates, times, words used. Kids don't always hand us a whole story, but their crumbs line up if we save them." That sentence pressed right against the place where I'd written harbor log. It made me feel less strange and more prepared. I told her I'd started one, just a simple spiral. She smiled, like that was a brave thing, not a basic one. On the way out, we ran into Mr. Leary by the crosswalk with his old terrier, Agnes. He tipped his cap at June and told her Agnes had been promoted to assistant mail inspector. June half smiled without showing teeth. It was the first smile of the day, and I pocketed it the way you pocket a lucky coin. By afternoon, the sky folded down into that flat gray it favors, and Kendra dropped another bag with the zipper open and a half-crumpled Target receipt poking out. "Can you keep her through Friday?" she said, already backing toward the car. "They're short." Her eyes didn't land anywhere near mine. When she left, the house exhaled. June curled on the rug with markers. I put on a pot of coffee and set the harbor log in front of me. "Time," I wrote. Bag dropped at 2:17 p.m. Receipt for snacks. June. Quiet. Compliant. Coloring. Drew rectangle with side dial. 2 tick marks. When you write things down, you stop wrestling them in your head. They sit on the page and behave. "Grandma?" June said without looking up. "Some doors make you turn it twice." "Do they?" I said. "If you don't, it gets stuck." She changed markers from green to blue and made the rectangle blue. Careful, staying inside the lines the way children do when they're trying not to spill. I wanted to ask what gets stuck and where and why, but questions can push a child back into their shell like a tide. So I poured 2 glasses of milk and slid cookies onto a plate like that was the only reason I'd stood up. She ate 1 bite and lined the crumbs in a row, tiny punctuation marks. I took the key out of the drawer and set it on the table like an ordinary object, like a spoon, like anything. June glanced, then went back to her drawing, which is its own kind of answer. I looped the ribbon over my finger and counted the phrase, 8. 8 is a good number in my family. My grandmother used to say it looks like the shape of a road that always comes back to itself. As the light got thin, the wind chimes on the porch tangled and then found their way apart. I wrote that down too. Don't laugh. Weather matters. Sounds matter. The body remembers what the mind edits. Miss Patel said details give the truth something to stand on. By evening, the house carried more quiet than it could hold without spilling. I washed the mugs, dried them, and put them away. June tucked her markers back in their box in color order. Over her shoulder, on the coloring page, the rectangle had a tiny circle and 2 neat little ticks. If it's just a door, I told myself, why does it need a dial that turns twice? By the next afternoon, I'd talked myself into doing the sensible thing. Ask straight, keep it small, Don't accuse. Kendra showed up in a hurry, hair scraped back, sweatshirt sleeves damp at the cuffs. She had that jitter you get when your life is a string of sprints. I walked her to the porch so June wouldn't have to listen to grown-up voices. "Hey," I said, light as I could. "June's been talking about a blue door." Her eyes didn't even blink. "Oh, that. I put a little cot in the basement. Sleepovers for the neighbor kid when her mom pulls doubles. No big deal." She smiled the way people smile when they want the subject to die where it stands. "Please don't worry. I've got it. And, Ruth, maybe don't bring stuff up with June? She gets imaginative." I felt the heat climb my neck. "I'm not trying to step on your toes," I said. "I just want to make sure she's okay." "She is," Kendra said, already shifting her weight toward the steps. "We're fine, really." The word fine hung between us like a doormat that had never met a shoe. I could have pressed. I could have said, "Show me." Instead, I swallowed my questions because the old habit is loyal peace at any price, and it always sends you the bill later. She left with a quick wave, and the porch chimes gave a little clatter as the door shut. I stood there with the key in my pocket, feeling its round head against my palm like a question I wasn't brave enough to ask twice. Word gets around here faster than the weather. By the time I walked to the corner store for milk, I caught a snippet near the lottery tickets. "Ruth means well, but she's nosy soft enough to pretend it wasn't meant for me." I smiled at the air and bought what I needed and walked home with my jaw unclenched on purpose. The thing about being an older woman in a small neighborhood is that concern gets rebranded as meddling if you hold it in the wrong light. Across the street, Mr. Leary was fussing with a toolbox under his porch lamp, Agnes the terrier snoring at his feet. "You got a minute?" he called, like he'd been waiting for my shadow to hit his steps. I crossed over. "You ever notice," he said, lowering his voice for no real reason, "how the oddest things happen between 1 and 3? Mail thieves, raccoons the size of toddlers, and lately cars that don't belong to anyone on this block." I waited. "I replaced my doorbell last fall," he went on, "and it grabs a decent still whenever a headlight hits the driveway just right." He rummaged in the toolbox and pulled out an envelope instead. Inside were a few grainy prints, all nighttime, all angles of bumpers and taillights, the same dented sedan showing up more than once. One of the timestamps made my stomach do a slow turn. 1:42 a.m., the exact stretch of night when June had come to the kitchen and folded herself into my lap without a word. "You think it's anything?" I asked, trying to sound curious rather than confirmed. "I think patterns are funny," he said. "You don't know they're there until you start keeping score. Somebody's making drops or pickups at that alley turn, and it's not pizza." Agnes thumped her tail, which felt like a verdict. I ran my thumb over the edge of the photo and then handed it back. "I don't want to make a mountain," I said. "Ma'am," he said, tilting his head toward my place, "mountains start as a grain. You see a grain, you write it down. The truth can survive the sunlight." When I stepped off his porch, my hand went to the ribboned key on reflex. I pulled it out, felt the weight, then pushed it back into my pocket like I'd touched the stove by mistake. Inside my own kitchen, I opened the spiral and wrote, "Kendra says sleepovers, neighbor kid, basement cot. Store gossip, nosy. Leary's stills, same sedan, 1:03 a.m. Repeated. I underlined the hour. The pen left a dent deep enough to feel on the next page. That evening, June hummed to herself while lining up her crayons by color. Blue last. She kissed the blue one before she put it down. The wind pressed its palm to the windows and the chimes argued, then settled. I poured milk and stood very still, letting the quiet stack up around us like books that hadn't been shelved yet. A little before 9, my doorbell buzzed. It was Mr. Leary again, holding one more print, this one clearer, headlights slashing the curb, the alley caught like a throat. He didn't hand it to me. He just tapped the corner where the timestamp glowed. "Tomorrow night," he said, eyes steady. "Keep watching. It's not into the bari." The next night, the rain came down in clean vertical lines, like the sky had decided to erase and start over. Kendra texted from the curb, no emojis, no punctuation, bag on porch. When I opened the door, the bag was there, and so was the smell of wet rubber and bleach. Across the street, Mr. Leary raised 2 fingers from his porch rail, a quiet hello that also meant I saw that too. June was coloring at the table again. Blue last, always last. I brought the bag in, and that's when I noticed the footprints on my mat. Small adult, tread like fish scales, water beaded in the grooves. Not mine. Not June's. I watched the dark ovals fade as the heat took them, and told myself it was nothing. Then I found the receipt crammed under a box of mac and cheese. Prepaid reload, $25, then another line for $40. The ink blurred where the rain had chewed it. I slid it into the harbor log with the others and wrote the time. At 10:15 there was a knock. Not on my door, on my pocket. The ribboned key kept bumping against my phone as if it were tapping out a code only it knew. I took it as a nudge to stop pacing and do the thing I'd been avoiding. I called the non-emergency number and asked for the community officer who covers our block. That's how I met Officer Ruiz. Her voice was steady, like someone who has learned how to carry other people's fear without spilling it. She said she could swing by if I preferred not to talk on the phone. 5 minutes later, she was at my table with June's crayons pushed to one side, her notepad to the other. She looked about 30, hair up, eyes awake and the kind that stays awake for a living. "I don't want to make a scene," I said. Something isn't right." She didn't roll her eyes, which made me grateful in a way that surprised me. I told her about the blue door, and the key, and the late cars, and the prepaid cards, and the wet prints that were already gone. I kept my voice flat and my details round. She asked simple questions and wrote simple words. Then she tapped her pen 3 times on the pad. "I have to be straight with you," she said. "From a legal standpoint, I need more than a grandmother's gut and some receipts to get a judge to sign anything. But listen, calm, collect, confirm, put every detail in that log. Dates, times, exact phrases, photos of the receipts before the ink fades. Don't confront anyone. Don't play detective. If a child says a sentence that changes your breathing, write the sentence as they said it, spelling and all, and call us again. That's how we build probable cause." She glanced toward June, who had turned her coloring page sideways and was drawing rain. "Kids whisper the truth," she said. "Our job is to give it something to stand on." "Mister." Leary knocked then, hat in hand like he'd practiced it. "Sorry to interrupt," he said to Ruiz. "You the one to see this?" He passed her a phone and scrolled to a clip from the night before. The camera had caught a car easing into the alley like it didn't want to wake it. A man in a hood lifted a small bundle from the back seat, a child half asleep, head lolling, and set the bundle on the back steps behind Kendra's kitchen. He didn't ring. He didn't wait. He wiped his hands on his jacket and jogged back to the car. When he reversed, the plate flashed just enough for Leary to freeze the frame. My stomach went cold and then hot, as if both things could be true at once. Ruiz didn't react much. She rewound, paused, scribbled the partial plate, the timestamp, the make, the dent over the wheel well. "Okay," she said, calm like a metronome. "This helps." June came to the doorway then, sleep heavy, hair electricity tangled. I opened my arms and she folded in without looking. Ruiz softened an inch. "We'll keep an eye on the alley," she said, voice gentler now. "You keep your log. If you hear anything tonight, don't investigate. Call. And remember, write it down like you'll have to read it to a stranger later." After she left, I spread the receipts on a tea towel to dry. The ink bled little blue islands that made the whole counter look like a cheap map. I took photos from 3 angles, then slid the paper into plastic sleeves like they were old letters. I copied the partial plate twice so I couldn't get it wrong, and tucked a copy under the magnet shaped like a lighthouse. Just before midnight, the wind shouldered my house again, and the porch chimes argued with it, loud then soft, like they were trying to tell me a secret in Morse. June murmured in her sleep. I stood at the back door and listened to a neighborhood I thought I knew, and realized I'd been wrong about how it moves after 10. Somewhere down the block, brakes whispered. A door somewhere answered. I wrote one last line before I put the pen down. Wet footprints, prepaid reload, car at 1:42 a.m. Child carried, not walked, no knock, partial plate. If there's nothing wrong, I asked my quiet kitchen, why do children arrive after midnight? By morning the house smelled like toast and rain, and the faint copper of nerves I couldn't talk myself out of. June padded in with her hair half tamed, hugged my waist, and leaned her cheek against my sweater like it was a wall she trusted. I poured cocoa and asked about nothing important: the library cart, the fox on her socks, whether Agnes the terrier really understood English. She answered in nods. Then, right when the cup fogged her glasses, she said it like a weather report. "The blue door smells like bleach." She didn't look at me when she said it. She said it to the cocoa, as if the cup were the only thing in the room qualified to hear a fact. My spoon stopped clinking. I kept my voice low so hers wouldn't retreat. "Bleach?" She nodded. "Quick. And the floor is cold. You have to stand on the towel to keep your feet from sticking." I felt the ground in me tilt an inch, the kind of tilt you get when a picture on the wall reveals it's been crooked longer than you realized. I wrote the sentence exactly as she said it into the harbor log. Then I asked if she wanted 1 or 2 marshmallows and let the room be ordinary again, because ordinary is a bridge back to safety. I called the school and said we were coming early to see Miss Patel. No drama, no thunderclap words, just an appointment. Miss Patel greeted June with a new box of crayons like a florist with a bouquet and showed her the basket where kids put worries they can't carry to class. June slid a little note in. Blank. I understood the gesture anyway. We talked in that quiet way adults do when a child is 10 feet away and still the center of the conversation. I told Miss Patel the sentence about bleach and the towel. I told her about the late cars and the prepaid receipts and the way June drew the dial with 2 ticks. Her face didn't do the thing faces sometimes do, that tight fake calm that says panic later. She just listened like she was measuring the width of something invisible, then said, "Thank you for telling me." She explained the part I already half knew, that people in her job are required to document and report when certain details show up, the exact words a child uses, the patterns that make your breath change speeds. "It doesn't accuse anyone," she said. "It opens a file. It puts eyes on a place where eyes might need to be." She asked if I had been writing things down. I slid the notebook over. She read a few lines, nodded once like a gavel, and said she would file today. On the way home, June hummed a song she didn't finish. I tried to hum along, failed, and gave up with a smile big enough to be a shelter. We stopped for oranges and walked back under a sky that was undecided about its plans. Near dusk, the neighborhood got that thin feeling it gets before the dark arrives, the light like paper held up to a window. Kendra's place was quiet in the loud way, blinds drawn, the kind of stillness that keeps its own secrets. I was wiping the counter when it came, a sound that didn't belong, not a knock like you give a friend. A small, flat tap, like knuckles hitting painted metal from the inside. I stood very still. Once. Then again. Then silence. The wind came up and the chimes on my porch answered, like they were trying to translate. I stepped out with the garbage and walked farther than I needed to the fence line we share. From there I could see it. The back hatch that used to be raw wood and was now a shade of blue the neighborhood hadn't voted on. The paint was new enough to shine where the last of the day found it. A strip of light lived along the jamb as if the door couldn't quite decide between open and closed. The smell hit me second. Not strong, not like a hospital, but enough to make the back of my mouth think of clean things done in a hurry. I set the trash down like that was my whole errand, and bent to pick up nothing in particular, long enough to look at the lock. It wasn't a knob. It was a dial, exactly like June's drawing, with a nick at 12 and another at somewhere near 5, 2 turns to catch, 2 turns to release. I didn't touch it. I'm not 20, and I'm not reckless. I stood there with my hand wrapped around the strap of the trash bag and did the other kind of brave, the kind that chooses not to force a door. I memorized the nick and the way the paint pooled around the plate. I counted my own breaths until they matched the wind. Then I went home and wrote, faint bleach odor, light at jam, metallic tapping from inside, dial with 2 stop points. I wrote it twice because the details tried to slither when I wasn't looking. Inside, June had fallen asleep on the couch with a picture book spread like a fallen tent. I covered her with the quilt and set the oranges in a bowl where they could pretend to be suns. My phone buzzed with nothing that mattered. I sat with my notebook and copied Miss Patel's words into the margin. It opens a file. It puts eyes where eyes might need to be. Out past my porch, the blue door let a sliver of light go and swallowed the rest. The chimes went quiet, like they were holding their breath with me. I tucked the key deeper into my pocket until the ribbon left its little ladder marks on my palm and whispered to the kitchen, to the night, to anyone listening, "I hear you." Then, soft and sure in my memory, June's voice returned. "You have to turn it twice." 2 clicks. By Saturday, Kendra decided the neighborhood needed smoke and smiles. She texted a mass invite, BBQ at 5, bring chips, and added me at the end like a footnote. I brought coleslaw because you can't argue with mayonnaise and cabbage. They mind their own business. Her backyard looked scrubbed within an inch of its life. The blue hatch wore its new paint like lip gloss, and the air had that faint tang I now recognized without naming. A pop-up table was laid with paper plates and half a dozen bags of off-brand chips. Kids played tag in the rectangle of grass, running up to the steps and stopping short like there were invisible boundaries drawn in chalk. Kendra moved through it all like a cruise director on a smaller ship, hug here, joke there, eyes always half a beat off mine. "We're all good," she said to everyone in general and no one in particular. "Busy season? Keeping it together." People nodded because people want to believe what lets them get back to their burgers. It's easier to forgive a sentence than a pattern. I offered to fetch more ice just to step into the kitchen alone. On the way, I passed the open basement door, the interior one, not the blue hatch, and caught a breath of cold that didn't belong to June's drawing but knew her anyway. The shelves were naked, the concrete swept, a lemony cleaner trying too hard. In the corner, a black contractor bag slumped with a weight that wasn't all air. Someone had tied it in a hurry. The knot looked like a pulled tooth. I told myself ice, just ice, but my hand tipped the bag's mouth an inch. Inside, snack wrappers crumpled into fists, a plastic water bottle with 2 small bites in the rim, gauze with a rust-colored bloom that might have been a scraped knee or the ghost of one. A prepaid reload slip folded into itself like it wanted to be smaller than paper. I slid that out, read the amount, the timestamp, the store number. I took a photo and another photo and a third when my breath stopped making fog and the lens cleared. "Need a hand?" a voice asked, and I flinched hard enough to jar the ice bucket into the sink. Miles was in the doorway with a smile that didn't touch any of the right muscles. He wore a soft zip-up and a look like he'd already counted the room. "Big turnout," he said, like we were comparing weather, not wills. "Looks that way," I said, and set the receipt on the counter long enough to blot the condensation from the bucket. The slip stuck and lifted and stuck again. A paper heartbeat. Miles glanced down, and then at me 4 beats, no words, and the kitchen got 3 degrees colder. He stepped back to let me pass, the kind of courtesy you extend to a car you plan to follow. Out on the lawn, he turned the grill like it owed him something. Kendra laughed too hard at a joke I didn't hear. I placed the ice like it had been my mission all along, and watched the way his eyes went to the back step every time a kid ran by. Agnes found me and leaned on my shin. Mr. Leary gave me the smallest nod, the kind you mail across a street. I didn't stay long. I don't have the gift of pretending when pretending becomes complicity. Back home, I laid the prepaid slip on a clean towel and dabbed the corner where the water had made the ink weep. The harbor log waited open. Time, place, what, who. I wrote it all down and slid the photo prints into sleeves with that steady-handedness you borrow from nurses and librarians. My phone buzzed, Officer Ruiz checking in. "Reports in the pipeline," she said. "These things don't sprint. Keep doing what you're doing. Don't confront. Don't go into that space. You're building a stack. Stacks change minds." "I found a bag," I said. "Trash. Gauze. Another reload. The basement smells like it's trying to pass a test." She breathed in through her nose the way you do to buy a second. "Document, then distance," she said. "If anything happens tonight, call it in. I'll swing the cruiser down your block on the hour." After we hung up, I pinned the slip into the log with a paper clip, then set the ribboned key across the page like a small, polite line I was drawing in public. The house settled into its evening noises, chimes snipping at the wind, June humming to her markers, the refrigerator making that low throat sound appliances make when they're thinking about forever. When June went to brush her teeth, I picked up the slip again. There was a P.O. box scrawled at the bottom, an address line someone had added in pen. The handwriting leaned left, a habit I know like a face. The capital letters were careful, except for the way the N looped back on itself at the end, like a child who can't resist finishing a shape twice. I stood very still until my breathing did what I asked it to do. Then I wrote the number down exactly as it was and underlined it once. Whose hand taught that loop? I used to think the bravest thing I'd ever done was stand still at Noah's graveside and not make a sound. People called it strength. What it really was, if I'm honest, was going numb so I wouldn't split open in public. Silence can look a lot like courage when you don't put your ear against it. Saturday night turned into the kind of quiet that makes you hear the house think. June fell asleep early with marker on her knuckle, that little blue crescent like she'd shaken hands with the sky. I washed the dishes slow, laid the prepaid slip on a towel, and put the harbor log in the center of the table like a guest who needed coffee. The chimes on the porch moved once and then remembered they were tired. I've been polite my whole life, trained in it like a trade. I know how to make room for other people's explanations, how to set the table for their excuses and call it dinner. Losing Noah sharpened that habit into something saintly. I told myself kindness was a cushion, and then I watched it get sat on until it remembered the shape of the person who sat. There's a difference between being good and being easy, and I've lived too long pretending they were neighbors. So I made the kind of coffee you make when you plan to tell yourself the truth. I opened the log and read it from the top timestamps. Quotes, the sentence about bleach, the dial with 2 ticks, the car that comes when the neighborhood sleeps. Every line was a small stone I'd carried in my pocket. On paper, they made a path. Kendra's laugh at the barbecue kept replaying, that bright brittle sound like glass held to the light. Miles's eyes did too, the way he looked at the receipt as if paper were a mirror, and he didn't like who it showed. I could feel the old reflex rise, make it easy. Say nothing. Hope good behavior tricks the world into being good back. That reflex has a sweet face and a bad record. I pulled the ribboned key from my pocket and set it on top of the log. The ribbon had started to fray where my thumb found the same place every time. 8 little threads. I touched each one with my nail and pictured the blue hatch, the nick at 12, the second nick near 5. June humming while she drew the circle and the 2 ticks like she was copying from something her hand already knew. There's a sentence that's been trying to live in my mouth for years. It never quite found its house key. Tonight it did. I wrote it on the inside cover of the log because if you don't put your declaration where you'll see it, you'll forget you made it. My love is open-handed, not open-ended. It looked clean on the page, clear, like a window after rain. I said it out loud to the refrigerator, the sink, to my own thin courage. My love is open-handed, not open-ended. It didn't make me bigger. It made me exact. The decision didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like measuring twice and cutting once. It felt like telling the truth without making it a parade. I was not going to confront anyone. I was not going to play rescuer. I was going to be the grown-up who wrote things down and called people whose job it is to open doors the legal way. I was going to stop confusing my fear of losing June with a reason to keep quiet. I closed my eyes and asked Noah out loud, because the dead have never minded my volume what he would want me to do if he'd had a say. I didn't hear words. I saw his old tool bag, the one with the tape measure that snaps back too fast if you don't respect it. I saw his hand check the level twice before he drove a screw. My boy built kitchens and decks and the kind of shelves that survive new owners. He knew the difference between rushing and moving. A boundary, he used to tell me, is a straight line you draw so the house doesn't buckle later. I went to the front door, took a nail from the jar, and hung the key ribbon on the small hook by the frame where I keep the dog leash that belongs to no dog. It swung once, tapped the wood, and settled. That was my line. Not a threat, not a performance. A rule. I tidied June's crayons by color the way she likes them, turned the mugs upside down to dry, and felt something in me stop bracing. I wasn't waiting for permission anymore. I wasn't choosing peace over safety. If anything needed choosing, I'd already done it with a pen. The phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't jump. I flipped it over and saw Officer Ruiz's name. "Can we meet early tomorrow?" the text said. A short-term missing report just pinged with details that might match your notes. The chimes on the porch gave one small answer, like a yes from somewhere that had been listening all along. Officer Ruiz met me in the morning with coffee that tasted like someone else's night shift. She'd printed a single page and slid it across my table. "Short-term missing," she said. "A little girl from 2 neighborhoods over. She told a clerk she ran from a place they make kids sleep, then an older cousin showed up, said it was a misunderstanding, took her home. No arrest. Not enough to hold it." She tapped the margin. "The time she made the report, it lines up with some of your notes. It wasn't the thunderclap I'd been secretly wanting. It was a match struck under damp wood." "So," I said, "what now?" "Now we keep building," she answered. "Your log. Any audio you can legally capture from your own line. Dates, times, exact phrases. Think of it as a map. Maps get people from here to there. Maps I could do." After she left, I crossed the street to Mr. Leary's porch with a pad of paper and the respect you owe a man who has spent his life knowing what time things arrive. We lined up his stills, my notes, his root memories, my insomnia. A pattern shook itself loose. 1, 20, 2, 5, 3, 18, 3:40. 4 visits a week, never the same nights in a row. The dented sedan wasn't the only car anymore. A second set of headlights had a hitch higher on the passenger side, and it always idled for a full minute before moving. He drew a little grid with a stub of carpenter's pencil. I wrote the times in my neatest print. We put a circle around the ones that bothered us most. "Things get thin between 3 and 4, Leary said, eyes on the paper. "The world forgets its manners. If they're going to do it, they'll do it then." I spent the afternoon trying to keep my hands busy so my mind wouldn't chew through the leash. June and I baked a pan of brownies and gave half to Agnes, which earned me a scolding from the vet in my memory and a thank you from the dog in front of me. Around 9, I tucked June in, read 2 chapters of a book about a raccoon detective, kissed her hair, and left the door cracked. The wind came in like it had rehearsed. The chimes on my porch turned from music to metronome. I charged my phone to full and opened a new voice memo. I stood at the fence line with my sweatshirt zipped and my feet in old sneakers in case I needed to move. Across the yard, the blue hatch kept its new paint's promise. The dial with its 2 nicks caught what was left of the day and then went blind with the dark. I wasn't looking for heroics. I was looking for sentences. I held the phone low and let it listen. At 1:17, nothing. At 2:04, a car passed without slowing. At 3:09, a cat argued with its shadow. I wrote those down anyway. Weather, too. Wind from the west. Rain on pause. The kind of details that sound silly until someone asks how you know what you know. At 3:38, the thin sound came like someone whispering into a sleeve, a shuffle and what might have been a cough swallowed back. I held still enough to hear my pulse try to be louder than the night. Then, soft and plain, a voice not built for pretending said, "Open when he texts." I didn't move. I hit the little flag icon on the memo the way Miss Patel had shown me, to mark the sentence exactly where it lived. Nothing after, just a door's tired breath and the far-off rattle of a truck changing gears where the road dips. I went inside and wrote the words as they came. I underlined none of them. The truth doesn't need makeup. Sleep isn't what you get on nights like that. You get a bench inside the hours and a blanket that only covers your knees. I sat in the kitchen with the harbor log and watched the stove clock blink 4:10, 4:11. When it reached 4:12, a strange calm came, the kind that makes your shoulders remember how to be shoulders. The chimes gave one long note, as if they'd agreed to keep a promise with me. I don't know what made me glance across the fence then. Habit, maybe, or the way the blue hatch seemed to hold its breath. Through the narrow gap where Kendra's curtain never quite meets the frame, a light woke up. Not a lamp, a rectangle, the kind of light that writes on a face. A phone on the counter near the sink, screen bright in an otherwise dark kitchen. I couldn't see who sent it, just the first line of the banner, big enough to read because the room behind it was night. Drop at blue door. Cash later. The words sat on the glass like they owned it. The screen went black. The house went back to pretending it slept. I didn't take a picture. I didn't need to. I wrote the line exactly into the log and circled 4:12 twice, the way a person circles a day on a calendar when they know they'll point to it again. I stood for a while with the ribboned key in my hand, letting the silk bite small rails into my palm. My love is open-handed, not open-ended, I told the quiet. Then I set the key down on the notebook and called Officer Ruiz. I left my voice low but clear, the way you speak when you've finally chosen your side of the door. They came just after dawn, when the light is soft enough to be mistaken for mercy. Ruiz had called at first bell. "We have enough for a warrant. Your log, the school report, the audio. Stay on your porch. Let us do the walking." I made coffee with hands that finally felt useful and watched the cruisers take their places like chess pieces that had learned patience. Kendra opened her door wearing the wrong expression for a morning smile built on sand, voice too bright. Ruiz read the paper with the kind of calm that isn't auditioning. 2 uniforms peeled off toward the hallway. I could see the blue hatch through the fence gap, looking almost innocent in the early light. I put my palm to my collarbone until I remembered it belonged lower. They moved through rooms in a method I recognized from hospital checks. Corners, closets, under, behind. The interior basement door yawned clean. Shelves bleached, concrete bare. The kind of tidy that dares you to call it a lie. My stomach braced for disappointment. Good people hate being right like this. Then one of the officers crouched by the breaker box and frowned. He flicked the latch, then paused, as if a thought had interrupted him. He pressed at the metal edge, and it gave a little just enough to show there was a second skin where the first should end. Ruiz knelt beside him. He slid a flat screwdriver into the seam as gently as someone prying open a music box they weren't sure they deserved. The cover came away with a sigh. Behind it, rubber-banded stacks of index cards, a battered spiral, and a little ledger book with a cracked spine. Inside the ledger, lines ruled in a hand that wanted to look businesslike and kept betraying itself. Dates, times, initials, arrows that meant from and to. A column labeled Reload, and beside it, numbers that matched the widths of the slips in my kitchen sleeves. Someone had pressed too hard on the pen. You could feel the tracks like scars on the next page down. Ruiz's face didn't change. She just handed the spiral to the evidence tech and turned the ledger sideways so the light caught better. I couldn't help it. I took a step toward my fence. On one page, the handwriting shifted different pressure, different slant, the careful capital letters I know from long before. The P.O. box, at the top of the sheet, wore my son's name, Noah Ellison. The room tilted, and then steadied. Identity can be stolen in a signature. The dead can be used by people who never even learned their laugh. For a second I tasted pennies, then something in me went cold and useful. Ruiz glanced up just once, and I knew she'd clocked the same wrongness I had. They dusted the ledger and the panel lip. Later I would hear the words, "Prints consistent with Miles Pike," said in a voice that made them facts. In the moment, I only heard the small sounds that truth makes when it gets a place to sit. The snap of a glove, the whisper of a bag sealing, the page turning where names pretend to be initials and numbers pretend to be math instead of kids. Kendra started strong. "This is harassment. Those are notes for my side gig. Babysitting, okay? Parents sign off." Her sentences pinballed from room to room looking for a hook. When Ruiz mentioned the phrase from my audio, "open," when he texts, Kendra's jaw lost its hinge. It wasn't like that," she said, softer now, eyes leaking bravado. "I didn't lock anybody up. I was keeping them safe for a few hours." Miles said, "He handles the cards. He has the phone. He told me it was fine. He told me not to ask questions." The ledger sat open on the workbench like a mouth. Ruiz didn't argue with Kendra. She didn't need a confession to do her job. She just kept arranging the proof in a straight line the law could walk down without tripping. In the hall, a camera clicked, and clicked again, the way a clock would if it had a shutter. I stood on my porch and set the key ribbon on top of my log so I wouldn't clench my fists. Shock has a hot face. Mine cooled on purpose. My boy's name on a P.O. box he never touched. Reload codes that matched slips drying on my tea towel. Times that matched the stills thumbtacked under Mr. Leary's lamp. "Patterns are funny," he'd said. "You don't know they're there until you start keeping score." When they brought the ledger out, I asked Ruiz quiet, not greedy, if she'd read the top line to me. She did. She read it slow. It sounded like a nail finding the stud behind drywall. "You did good, Ruth," she said finally, voice lower than the morning. "You gave this a spine." Across the yard, Kendra sagged against the doorframe like a person whose story had just been told back to her without the pretty parts. "He keeps everything," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone, eyes fixed on the ledger in Ruiz's hands. "He's the one with the messages. I swear." Maybe she was telling the truth about that part. Maybe she wasn't. Either way, the page didn't care. Paper doesn't argue. It remembers. I picked up the key ribbon and laid it across my notebook like a bookmark you can see from the street. The chimes lifted once and fell still. Ruiz's radio crackled with a name I didn't know. I thought the morning had already spent all its surprises. It hadn't. The name that cracked over Ruiz's radio came with a chill I could feel from my porch. Tara, not a neighbor, not a parent. A woman from 2 zip codes over who helped moms find coverage. The kind of phrasing that sounds like a favor until you see the receipts. Ruiz took a call, face unreadable, and then everything on our block seemed to slide half an inch into place. They didn't drag miles out like a movie. They found him 2 streets away, idling where the road dips, thumb-tapping a phone that did not belong to him. In the back and forth that followed, words I caught in pieces from my porch, phrases carried by the wind. I heard what I needed. Messages pulled, reload codes cross-matched, addresses that rhymed with each other. Tara's number sat in the center of it like a spider that had learned to smile. Kendra's shoulders dropped in a way I recognized from rooms where bad news is finally said out loud and the pretending muscle gives up. "He took Noah's mail," she said, eyes on the ledger as if it might answer. "He said it was cleaner if the box wasn't in my name." Tara told him how. She said everybody does it this way. Everybody is one of those words that tries to hypnotize you into losing count. Ruiz didn't let it. She walked Kendra through what would happen next without making promises that didn't belong to her. "You're responsible for what happened in your home," she said, even and steady. "If you cooperate fully, there are options, but the children come first, today." Child Protective Services pulled up with the kind of quiet efficiency that makes the word protective feel earned. A woman with tired, kind eyes kneeled to June's height and asked simple questions. I stayed where I was, in the doorway, palms open against the jamb the way you hold a door for someone you love who needs to walk through it under their own power. June looked at me like she always has when her body remembers I don't leave. I gave her the smallest nod I could manage without breaking. Kendra asked to sit, and they let her. The words came halting, then faster, as if the truth had been running laps in her chest and finally found the exit. Debt. The side gig that grew legs. A cousin who knew someone. Just until Christmas, then just until tax return, then just until the next raise. She didn't say cult or ring or any other word the news likes. She said fear and bills and the kind of pride that keeps you from asking for help until you're in business with people who like you small. None of it washed away what the ledger held. It didn't have to. Contradictions can live in the same sentence. She had done harm. She had been harmed. Both things fit. They led Miles past the hedge in cuffs, his mouth working around a grin that wouldn't hold. Agnes barked once, as if to mark the file. Tara, I learned later, was found sitting in a different kitchen with a spreadsheet open on a laptop and 3 phones lined up like soldiers at inspection. There's always someone who thinks logistics makes them a genius. Logistics just makes the damage more efficient. Ruiz came to my porch last. The morning had sharpened into sun around the edges, the way it sometimes does after rain, as if to say I was here the whole time. "Temporary kinship placement," she said, holding out a form with my name spelled right. "While Kendra is processed and assessed, it means June can stay with you, officially, and we have a clean line to your door." I signed with hands that didn't shake because they'd already done their shaking. Miss Patel arrived not long after, the mandated report now a trail instead of a single dot. She squeezed my shoulder the way women do when they don't want to step on your dignity and also don't want you to fall over. "Mr. Leary shuffled across with Agnes and a plate of something that was either brownies or very dark cornbread. He apologized for not knowing which. Neighbors did that slow parade people do when they realize they've misnamed a thing. A few looked me in the eye. Most didn't. Mrs. Han from 3 doors down set a loaf of bread on my steps and said, "I should have asked if you were okay," which is the truest apology I've ever heard. Kendra looked smaller without defiance. "I'm sorry," she said to the air, and then, braver, to me. I'm sorry I told June not to tell you. I'm sorry I let fear pick our family. Her face softened around the bones I remembered from a gentler year. If I cooperate, can I fix any of this? You can start, I said. Starting is not fixing, but it's the only road that leads there. Things were watching. She nodded, and for once didn't try to make the room like her for it. By afternoon, the house remembered how to be a house. June lined her crayons in rainbow order and asked if the oranges on the table were still Sun's. We ate two just to make sure. The harbor log lay open, its pages now heavy with use, the way a cookbook gets honest. I tucked the key ribbon inside the back cover and closed it, not to hide anything, but because the first chapter was over. People will ask why I didn't kick the door, why I didn't stake out the alley with a bat and a prayer. I could tell them it's because I'm nearly 60, and my knees have opinions. The truer answer is this: I don't want a world where the only way to be safe is to be reckless. I want a world where policies work, and paper has a spine, and neighbors keep score out loud. We flirt with heroics when systems fail. I chose to be boring and exact saved a child. That night, June fell asleep with her palm open on the quilt, the same way she had the first night waiting for a thing she couldn't name. I placed the key ribbon in that hand for a breath, then took it back and set it in the little wooden box where I keep Noah's cufflinks and a photo of him holding a ladder wrong and laughing about it. I slid the harbor log beside it. Paper doesn't argue, it remembers. Before I turned out the light, I stood on the porch and let the wind lift the chimes into one clear note. My love is open-handed, not open-ended, I told the air, and meant it in every direction it could go. If you need permission to draw a boundary, consider this yours. Here's the heart of it. Love needs limits to stay love. Or as Ruth finally wrote, my love is open-handed, not open-ended. Boundaries aren't punishment. They're the rails that keep the train from tipping. When the world tried to gaslight her into silence, a grandma chose something boring and powerful: paper, time, and a steady hand. What does that look like for us? Start small and exact. Calm, collect, confirm. When a child shares something heavy, breathe. Write the words exactly as they said them, and confirm immediate safety. Keep a simple family incident log: dates, times, who was present, what was seen or heard, any receipts, photos. If school is involved, remember counselors are mandated reporters. Loop them in. Use your city's non-emergency police line for documentation. Emergencies still mean 911. Before you sign anything in a tense moment, pause and run the 7 questions before you sign. Who keeps the original? Scope, time limits, contact, corrections, case number, next step. And then share the weight. Pick one trusted person and tell them what you wrote. Let the key ribbon be your reminder. You don't have to kick doors. You open them with process. Let the harbor log be your anchor. Paper doesn't argue, it remembers. And when the wind rattles the chimes, hear it as a nudge to stand where you said you would. This is not legal advice. If this resonated, drop one sentence you'll tell yourself on the hard days. Then download the 1-page family incident log in the description to start your own record. If you want more stories like this, quiet, sturdy, and true, subscribe and stay close. May you sleep tonight on the boundary you chose, and wake knowing it kept the people you love a little safer.